Welcome to the Going Green podcast. Today we're going to have a look at pie in the sky ideas. And, well, they literally are a lot of these in the sky ideas. Climate change is here. We've basically been seeing over the last month or so record heat waves across the whole world, really. We've seen also record sea temperatures. These have been sort of, higher than ever before. I suppose 1.5 degrees is nearly upon us. And is it too late, Paul, to do the little things to change the climate? Or do we need far more radical and expensive ideas to try and, steady or perhaps even reverse climate change?
Yeah, so the idea is sort of, we've got all these problems happening in all sorts of places, and the answer is what we're doing is not too little, but it is a little bit too little, too late. And so what we need now is some big, bold ideas to solve everything. And, the answer is we haven't quite, not that we haven't got ideas, that's the wrong way to put it, but it is one of those things where we are struggling to come up with these bold plans, and even worse, it's trying to actually implement any of the bold plans that are out there. And one of the latest ideas, which is not a new idea, but is actually a plan now, as opposed to previously where it was just like, do it, is to basically build a set of, I'm not saying sunshades, but essentially a large mirror or a blocking device that blocks, or essentially would block, about 10% of the sun's light/energy hitting the Earth. And they are proposing to do this with a large asteroid, as in go out to the asteroid belt or wherever, find one, bring it back to the Earth's orbit, and then park it there, and let it just sit there and just act as a second moon, but as a nice sunshade.
Yes. Now, I can see a couple of problems with this. We've got enough problems trying to put man in orbit. We have a considerable amount of problems trying to get a man to the moon. Like, we haven't done that again for about 50 odd years. What do you reckon the chances of going reaching an asteroid, Paul, and then B, bringing it back here before we get this 1.5 happening?
Now,
And that's looking like sort of in the next few years.
Yeah, the answer is it's a bit more of, as I said, it's these big ideas, big bold plans, but it isn't as ludicrous as we think. And the reasons being is not by how many near-Earth asteroids we have, but of course, one's near-Earth asteroids that we know of that actually fly and we can regularly get. Like there's one, I think, that's got a large orbit around every year that basically comes in like a mini moon, but it's an extra satellite of Earth. And the idea potentially, of course, is to go after those ones, not go straight to the big asteroid belts and sort of those things, is to actually use some of these near Earth objects as opposed to far Earth objects as the basis. And then, even on top of all that, of capturing, and they actually don't propose having it as one solid lump. What they actually propose is more to help use the gravity of the Earth-Moon system and basically break this asteroid up into basically a large sphere or cloud of dust, and basically sort of place it there. And then, of course, it covers a more surface area, but it's not enough to, it still lets light through as opposed to a big rock, but it just prevents 10% of the energy, coming to us.
Yeah, I can see a couple of problems with this. One is doing it. But the second one, let's assume they do it. And now we've got 10% less sunshine falling everywhere on the Earth. one of the things that we have in this world that helps the Earth is global warming. In that, I mean that we've got things like carbon dioxide in the air, and this stops our planet being where it is, being an ice planet. So let's suppose we cut down the sun's rays by 10%, the Earth cools down. Now it goes too far, and we've now got another problem that we've actually reversed this so much so that we've got an ice planet, and bye-bye people, bye-bye plants,
Yeah,
bye-bye everything,
yeah,
and we can't get rid of it.
yeah. This lovely plan of making this sort of sunshade is more. If we do it, it's a feature of the solar system as opposed to, sort of being like a switch we can turn it on and off. It
Yeah.
is very permanent, but you take it or leave it sort of thing.
I think what's going to happen if they actually did achieve this, they could actually give us rings, much like Saturn and I think Uranus has rings, doesn't it? And possibly even Neptune's got some rings. So, we may have rings like that, which might be useful, I suppose. Make it look very pretty, I suppose. Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I'm not so happy with this idea, Paul. Not really.
no. So that's the first pie in the sky idea. These bold plans.
One of the ones that I've heard of, and I know people are really working on, is to do this fusion. And if we can get fusion working, we can get rid of the need for fossil fuels, all that radioactive contamination we get with using nuclear fission. And that's not going very far either at the moment, is it? We hear all these things about it. It'll be here next week or next year or next 10 years, and
Yeah.
that's not going anywhere.
Well, the problem with all that is that it's theoretically possible,
Yeah,
and we're just trying to basically work out, and that's why fusion power is also seen as sort of the golden boy of power generation, because it is this virtually unlimited power source that is clean and green. We can do that, but that's why we're attempting to get there. Problem is, we've got to work out how to get there.
yeah.
And so that's the crux of the whole problem.
So the other alternative idea that I've read about is to put the big mirror in space to reflect the sun's rays down onto the Earth, and this is going to provide most of the energy, because solar panels, they've got a problem that they're not outside the atmosphere, so they don't collect as much solar energy. Whereas if we could collect the solar energy in space in one way or another and beam that energy down to the Earth, that would be quite effective. Now, I've seen this in a film before. I think it was a James Bond film where they were trying to wipe out the Earth with this sort of death ray.
Yeah. It goes back to the idea, sort of, instead of having, as I said, the asteroid cloud mess, is to basically have this large mirror in essentially able to do gather some solar energy and then basically beam it as a concentrated beam, almost as a large laser or death ray, as you nicely call it. And because of the fact they were talking about how not solar panels are not very good at converting electricity, but essentially almost use it as a way to beam electricity down. Yeah, there's been two ideas, whether you actually get solar panels in space and then beam the energy down. Well, how are you going to do that? Well, the answer is just when you put a
Magic.
Yeah. However, the answer is, could you sort of have a network of relays that bounce the light around and basically hit the same spot all the time? That's unfortunately gonna cook. However, by concentrating the light's energy, you're actually getting more. Well, I think.
Yeah, but that's how we do some of the solar systems. There's one in France and in America where they have lots of sort of mirrors effectively beaming the sun's rays onto a small part. I've got a little solar furnace which collects the solar rays and points it at a little bucket and basically superheats water, and that can sort of drive turbines and make electricity. Yeah, very effective. Just do that from space. I just wait for it to escape somehow and go through cities like London, Paris, Berlin, whatever, and creating a sway several miles wide of sort of death and destruction.
Yeah, so this is why the solar collector essentially is not really fond of, because it's sort of like, well, the next idea was sort of, could we not just shine the light when it's nighttime? Well, that was bold plan, sort of going like, why?
Well, then you wouldn't need to put the lights on at night.
Correct. Therefore saving power. You see. Oh, very very neat and novel. But yeah, that wasn't as thought out and thought through. But it is these radical plans looking at, and it is sort of saying, we've got to find one idea that we can all go on to and get towards. It is sort of, how do we do all these things?
Right. Well, there's another basic idea, and that is, okay, if we can't sort of stop the sun, we can't sort of really get rid of all the CO2, because none of the governments seem to be willing to sign up to things, or if they do sign up, to actually do it. How about putting more clouds in the way? Like sunny England. I'm just thinking of the Europe. It's been baking in this sort of hot sunshine all summer, and we've been celebrating this layer of cloud and wet stuff coming down.
Yeah. So this isn't actually such a balmy idea, and we've reported in the previous episode of this podcast that with the maritime industry moving away from a sulfur heavy based
Fuel oil. Yeah. In the boats,
in the lovely vessels,
ships.
They've of course been outputting, or stop outputting, all these sulfur particles into the air. And what the major point what we were seeing is that having these sulfur particles or sulfites in the air basically help cloud formation, and thus then basically cooled the Earth down in that particular spot, as in more cloud, less
global dimming.
Effectively global dimming, yeah. And so the point they're making from this is, well, could we just go out and just spray, say, sulfites into the stratosphere or even the troposphere, depending which technology and which sulfite you want to put in. And that basically is to do some of this cloud seeding and basically forming this nice layer of shiny metal. I say shiny metal, these shiny particles that basically reflect the light off, and basically instead of doing it locally, you just do it all over the place. And instead of CO2, you then got this layer above the CO2. So then there's nothing trapping as much heat in. And basically, we get global warming going for the bit we've got. And then as it slowly runs out of energy, you see, then we got these the sulfites in the atmosphere to reflect as much sun as we've got. So we still keep the temperature, but not as much of the increase in temperature that's being caused. So we're reflecting away. And then, of course, because the sulfites don't last that long, essentially we're going to have to be continually putting up for the next 20 years. Basically, once it's come down, you stop putting out the sulfites and just basically let the reflectivity, or I say the clouds decrease, and therefore you've got this nice balance between solar input, as in global warming, as well as solar and global dimming, and you've now got the balance corrected.
Yeah, I suppose so. You can also just spray salt water up, can't you, as well? You wouldn't have to use the sulfites.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where you just need something that can seed the clouds. Salt will do it, no problem. It's just one of the dumb things of actually transporting the salt water up, and sort of, water is actually the problem, because, salt water, fun enough, contains a lot of water in the salt water. Who knew? And so they're trying to sort of say, well, they want the salt, but not the water. And so it's trying to sort of how do you take the salt out? And effectively what they're doing is this sulfur, not sulfur, this salt water plume jet is essentially, well, let's just let the air evaporate the water, leaving the salt then running around in the air. And then basically we like say large fans is basically just,
I don't know if you need leaf fans as long as you've got a bit of wind.
yeah. So you can see where the sort of this idea is sort of coming from in regards to trying to get it.
Yeah.
You know, even if you do it in the equator, you just sit in the equator, you just pump the salt water air up.
But we are talking about going up a mile or two.
Yeah, that's the problem. It's yeah, sure, you can pump water up and spray and make a nice little fountain, little water feature.
So those salt particles then act as what we call cloud condensation nuclei.
Ugh.
Wow, big words. Basically, they make little particles which, and then the water basically condenses around these, forming sort of more water droplets. So you get bigger and brighter clouds, and these will reflect the sunshine. Sounds really possible, that one.
Yeah, it's not as ludicrous as people think. Yeah, as I said, it's going to take some effort, but if we don't do, if you want to do it and said this is the solution, as in let's do it, let's go radical and do it big. Go home, go big, go home, or go home, sort of style. But unfortunately, no one wants to do it. But that's a different story.
So we could put these marine clouds up because we're talking about doing it largely over the sea. Another one I saw was to create the ocean mirror, which is basically to make the sea look more white by pumping up lots of micro bubbles in the ocean surface. And that's going to make all this sea foam, and that's going to reflect away all the sunlight and cool the planet. Now, I can see a couple of problems with this one.
Oh, can you?
Yeah. We'd have to make fairly big area. That's an awful lot of bubbles. You're going to have to keep doing it all the time. That's going to require a lot of energy. And it's only going to reflect the light away. That's actually not going to stop it coming down in the first place. At least the cloud idea is going to intercept it before it gets here.
Yeah, it is this whole sort of, don't bother global warming, don't affect that. Just prevent the input of the energy going in. Whereas, the solar bubble, there's two ways of doing it. Is one, they believe to basically go down and pump air down and then let that bubble up. Or do you basically muck up the ocean's floor and sort of...
Oh, what a good idea.
Scrape along, and then release all this stuff. There's been ideas, basically turning the ocean surface into this...
Yeah, if we hadn't got a big problem, that was going to create an even bigger problem, yes.
Yeah, I know.
The other problem is that basically, if you've got this foam, this is white, this is going to reflect the light back. Good. But unfortunately, light isn't just visible light. It's all the others, the UV and the infrared. And what are these bubbles going to do to that?
Well,
talking to you as a chemist here.
Well, the answer is
not a lot.
Not a lot. This is the whole point. And even worse, let's say you do this in, you got to do this in big
areas, yeah.
But a lot of the shallow waters of the Earth, and we're talking shallow by a mile, as in a depth of a mile, as opposed to fathoms, whatever, right? The light is actually needed for the underwater plants because that's how much light is there. So it is, unfortunately, all these problems of you create this problem. You say, just do it in the deep ocean. I'm like, you trying to get bubbles of air down there. You try that. Yeah, it's a bit ridiculous. But as I said, if we're gonna do it, we gotta go home. Go big or go home. It's no problem.
Right. So, Paul, you talked about this idea of making more clouds, but then I was reading about another bright idea, which was to actually get rid of some of the clouds to do cloud thinning. Now, this option is the idea that clouds, yes, they do reflect the sunshine, but other clouds, cirrus clouds, do the opposite. They absorb large amounts of radiation.
Yeah, reading to this is it's one of those awkward things. That sort of like you go, okay, what? And the answer is when we make clouds, we want the right type of clouds. And
You mean like the right sort of snow?
yeah, it's a bit sort of awkward and ludicrous, but it's just how it goes. And essentially, as I say, these cirrus clouds, these nice white wispy looking clouds, basically, not they form a blanket. That's the wrong way to put it. But essentially, they not absorb lots of things, but think of them like a nice cozy blanket. And essentially, they're very good because they're thin and they trap, of course, or increase global warming in regard to the greenhouse effect, as in they are able to bounce the heat and the radiating light around better, of course, than the big, fluffy, I say grey, but big fluffy clouds. It's one of those things. And so, as they said, potentially, if you go find the cirrus clouds, this is where go out find the cirrus clouds.
They're thin, wispy ones, aren't they?
They're the thin, wispy ones.
Yeah.
And essentially fly your plane through them, which was a bit sort of right, sure, okay. You disrupt, of course, the not the membrane or the material, but you disrupt this cloud.
The cohesive forces, I think it is. Isn't it?
That's what they and basically you then make holes in the cirrus cloud, and of course that leaks, and that's what essentially we want.
Because they're largely made of ice crystals, aren't they? At very high altitudes, and they absorb the long wave radiation. So, although they reflect some, they don't reflect all of it, and on balance, they actually warm the planet. So, let's fly planes through them, using it and putting in lots more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and see if we can get rid of them.
Yeah. So as I said, we're talking silly, ludicrous plans, but it could be done because, of course, basically you tell pilots to choose their flight paths, and if they fly through a cirrus cloud, then they get a bonus. Yeah.
I could just see this happening. Yeah.
Yeah. Just
Yeah.
daft things, but it is
the flight from London to New York now takes 16 hours because the pilot picked up all these extra bonuses by flying through these cirrus clouds.
Yes. As I said, it is. You asked for these lovely big ideas. You never said how serious or even practical, or even how not game changing, but it's sort of like these are just ideas and plans to do things. Not actually.
Yeah, I sometimes get the feeling some of these ideas haven't actually been thought through. They just get published, and the person actually hasn't actually necessarily thought it through. There are some other sensible ones, like let's reforest the whole world.
Well, yes, the idea essentially is that trees are wonderful at not climate control, but basically they do like to create they create their own environments in which is benefit to live on. And so could we basically attempt to do that? Plant more trees, and there's no problem in planting more trees, and it's great, it's wonderful, except of course we should have been planting 30 years earlier. And even worse, the trees that we currently got are being deforested, and all sorts of problems. I know that we signed up to do all these reforestation ideas and plans, and that's not been going well because of course the world doesn't have enough saplings. And the reason is because saplings take a lot of time and effort to grow. And we should have been planning on suddenly tripling the amount of saplings we needed for this global project of reforestation. We need to done it and actually plan that. So everybody's saying, right, we signed up to the idea. Let's buy some sapling. Oh, wait, we can't.
Yeah, but did you see that other idea, Paul, where they I think it was the U.S. Air Force suggested they actually bombed areas with tree seeds.
Yeah.
That sounded a really exciting idea. You can just imagine this United States aircraft bombing, over an area and basically firing, not just dropping, but they were thinking of firing these little seeds into the ground. They didn't seem to think that would actually destroy the seed when it hit. And the amount of actual damage they would actually create was greater than what they're actually trying to do.
Yeah, welcome to the U.S. Air Force.
Sorry, U.S. Air Force.
Yeah. But the idea is the amount of trees. You see, this is the point they're trying to make, is that we essentially tree bombing is what the word definition of the word should be called. Yeah, the idea is that's the sort of scale of the amount of trees we need. We don't need sort of one or two. No, we need literal hundreds and thousands of trees and saplings to actually grow. And the answer is, yeah, that's the way to go. It is that large scale to go through and sort of not, I say bomb everything, but that, when you're planting trees, you want to be planting trees in the tens of thousands, not the hundreds. So, although the plan seems a bit ridiculous, it's the right scale for the problem. And, so that's whole why it was idea, because it was the way to solve the sort of scale issue as opposed to the amount issue. But it just shows you that sort of ludicrous plans you have to think of these things on the large scale rather than just one or two trees. No, we're talking literal tens and thousands of these trees to be planted. And speaking of planting trees and those sort of things, I think we should all start going and building ourselves some igloos.
Oh, you thinking of building some artificial glaciers here, Paul?
Well, the answer to that is, well, we're running out of glaciers, so let's just build ourselves glaciers. Yeah, and these are effectively, it's an old traditional Tibetan or at least Himalayan based idea, which essentially is glaciers form. Unfortunately, glaciers work by sort of melting, and all that water they melt flows down, and the more the water on the surface of the glacier, it's a bit complicated in sort of the size and scale, but apparently water on top of a glacier stops or melts that bit of the glacier, which of course then has a problem. So if you could sort of put a plastic sheet over the top of the glacier and then, I say pump, but obviously you channel all the water downhill, and then much like the salt to pump up, you basically, using, say, the gravity, the height difference between the force going up, you basically, through your igloo, because that's, how it works, is up the chimney pot, you essentially sprout and spray water about 100 meters up in the air. Great. And that's, of course, and if you go for a nice chilly spot or high up where the atmosphere is colder, and so we're not talking about doing this in the middle of a desert, but essentially the water then freezes and forms a nice sort of like a volcano or cone. And suddenly when eventually spring comes, and this is in the Himalayas, when the spring comes, all the ice that has just formed because of your freezing it is then melts away, and that can form basically irrigation channels. So you can almost do this as the idea of in sort of not homes, but sort of large areas where there's not much rainfall, but there is high mountains. So as a way to basically take water, you shove it up high in the mountains, and then basically capture all the water instead of it evaporating away to form ice. And then, of course, then it can then, when it gets hotter again, water. And we're talking, it could be done in the Alps, for instance, those sorts of places. It's ski resorts, which seems a bit daft, but, we're talking by doing that, you contain the water, then you can let it flow away then later. So you've got the ice that's formed, which of course is doing the cooling. Therefore, now you've got an area which is help cooling. It's a daft idea. It sounds neat and novel. It needs a bit of work. However, let's say how many mountains are all over the place? Let's say you take all the mountains in the world that have temperatures below freezing, or even where snow is formed. That's the critical thing, and then build these. They're Schweppes, aren't they? Not Schweppes as in the nice drink, but looking them up, so they're quite novel. And therefore we can just live. I say live in them, but you can use them as refrigerators or whatever.
Yeah. So there's been a whole few different ideas. They are pie in the sky ideas. I can't see many of them really coming to any fruition whatsoever. Maybe the clouds.
Possibly. And the answer is we don't mind if one of them, it seems we need to say, right, let's go do it, and let's, concentrate on doing that and see if those works. Because
we've got to do it now, though.
But we've got to do it now. And that's the whole point of it all.
Because we haven't done other things that we've promised to do yet. You've been listening to the Going Green podcast, having a look at pie in the sky ideas. Yeah, they really are. We'll be back next time with some more ideas on Going Green. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And a goodbye from me.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.